Halide Edib Adıvar was a Turkish novelist, nationalist, and political leader for women's rights. She was best known for her novels criticizing the low social status of Turkish women and what she saw as the lack of interest of most women in changing the situation. Early life. Halide Edib was born in Istanbul, Ottoman Empire. Her father was a secretary of the Ottoman Sultan Abdülhamid II. Halide Edib was educated at home by private tutors from whom she learned European and Ottoman literature, religion, philosophy, sociology, piano playing, English, French, and Arabic. She learned Greek from her neighbors and from briefly attending a Greek school in Constantinople. She attended the American College for Girls briefly in 1893. In 1897, she translated Mother by Jacob Abid, for which the Sultan awarded her the Order of Charity. She attended the American College again from 1899 to 1901. When she graduated, her father's house was a center of intellectual activity in Istanbul, and even as a child Halide Edib participated in the intellectual life of the city. After graduating, she married the mathematician and astronomer Salih Zeki Bey, with whom she had 2 sons. She continued her intellectual activities, however, and in 1908 began writing articles on education and on the status of women for Tevfik Fikret's newspaper Tanan and the women's journal Demet. She published her first novel, Seviye Talip, in 1909. Because of her articles on education, the Education Ministry hired her to reform girls' schools in Constantinople. She worked with Naki Hanım on curriculum and pedagogy changes and also taught pedagogy, ethics, and history in various schools. She resigned over a disagreement with the ministry concerning mosque schools. She received a divorce from Salih Zeki in 1910. Her house became an intellectual salon, especially for those interested in new concepts of Turkishness. She became involved with the Turkish Hearth in 1911 and became the first female member in 1912. She was also a founder of the Elevation of Women organization. During World War I, she married again in 1917 to Dr. Adnan and the next year took a job as a lecturer in literature at Istanbul University's Faculty of Letters. It was during this time that she became increasingly active in Turkey's nationalist movement, influenced by the ideas of Ziya Gökalp. In 1916–1917, she acted as Ottoman inspector for schools in Damascus, Beirut and the College St. Joseph in Mount Lebanon. The students at these schools included hundreds of Armenian, Arab, Kurdish, and Turkish orphans. In the course of the Armenian genocide and under the direction of Halide Edib Adıvar and Cemal Pasha, about 1,000 Armenian and 200 Kurdish children were Turkified in the College St. Joseph in Ankara. According to a teacher who worked briefly under her, Halide Edib was at the head of an orphanage of 1,000 children in the mountains. These were mostly Armenian children. She said, "The names are changed, but they are children. They don't know what religion means. Now, they must be fed and clothed and kept safe." She didn't say what would be afterwards. Quote, according to Halide Edib, these children were given Muslim names under orders from Cemal Pasha. She records a 1916 conversation thus: "I said, quote, why do you allow Armenian children to be called by Muslim names? It looks like turning the Armenians into Muslims, and history someday will revenge it on the coming generation of Turks." Quote, "You are an idealist," answered gravely. Do you believe that by turning a few hundred Armenian boys and girls Muslim I think I benefit my race? You have seen the Armenian orphanages in Damascus run by Armenians. There is no room in those. There is no money to open another Armenian orphanage. This is a Muslim orphanage, and only Muslim orphans are allowed. When I hear of wandering and starving children, I send them to Ankara. I have to keep them alive. I do not care how. I cannot bear to see them die in the streets. Afterward, I asked, "Do you mean after the war?" He asked, "After the war they will go back to the people." I hope none is too small to realize his race. Quote, "I will never have anything to do with such an orphanage." He shook his head. "You will," he said, "if you see them in misery and suffering, you'll go to them and not think for a moment about the names and religion." During the War of Independence, after the defeat of the Ottoman Empire in World War I, British troops occupied Istanbul and Allies occupied various parts of the empire. Mustafa Kemal began organizing resistance to the occupation. Halide Edib gained a reputation in Istanbul as a firebrand and a dangerous agitator. Quote, "She was one of the main figures of empire to give speech to thousands of people protesting occupation of Izmir by Greece during Sultan Ahmed demonstrations. The British tried to exile her and several other leaders to Malta in March 1920. Halide Edib escaped to Anatolia together with her husband to join the Turkish national resistance. On the road to Ankara she met with Yunus Nadi, another journalist who had decided to join the nationalists. In a meeting at the train station in Gave on the 31st of March 1920, they agreed on the importance of informing the international public opinion about the developments regarding the Turkish War of Liberation and decided to help the national struggle by establishing a news agency. They concurred on the name Anadolu Ajansi. During the Greco-Turkish War she was granted the ranks of first corporal and then sergeant in the nationalist army. She traveled to the fronts, worked in the headquarters of Ismet Pasha, commander of the Western Front, and wrote her impressions of the scorched earth policy of the invading Greek army and the Greek atrocities in Western Anatolia in her book The Turkish Ordeal. After the war, in 1926, Halide Edib and many associates were accused of treason. She and her husband escaped to Europe. They lived in France and the United Kingdom from 1926 to 1939. Halide Edib traveled widely, teaching and lecturing repeatedly in the United States and in India. She collected her impressions of India as a British colony in her book, Inside India. She returned to Turkey in 1939, becoming a professor in English literature at the Faculty of Letters in Istanbul. In 1950, she was elected to Parliament, resigning in 1954. This was the only formal political position she ever held. Description: a contemporary described her as a slight, tiny little person, with masses of auburn hair and large, expressive oriental eyes. She has opinions on most subjects, and discusses the problems of the day in a manner which charms one, not so much on account of what she says, but because it is so different from what one expected. Death: Halide Edib died on January 9, 1964 in Istanbul. She was laid to rest at the Merkez Efendi Cemetery in Istanbul. Major works: Sevi Utala, Andan, Mevet Hükümler, Yeni Turan, Sundi Siri, Atist and Gomlik, Sakan Uri, Kalbagrisi, Vurun Karpai. The Memoirs of Halide Edib, New York, London, The Century, 1926. The Turkish Ordeal, New York, London, The Century, 1928. Zenon and Oglu, Turkey Faces West, New Haven, London, Yale University Press, Oxford University Press, 1930. The Clown and His Daughter, Turkan Atal Imtihani. as a character in literature and film. The novel Halide's Gift by Francis Kassan is a coming-of-age story about Halide Edib's youth and maturation. Halide Edib appears as a character in several films and television shows, including Kurtulus, Come Here Yet, and The Young Indiana Jones Chronicles. Several of Halide Edib's novels have also been adapted for film and television. Halide Edib is the subject of The Greedy Heart of Halide Edib, a documentary film for school children.